Welcome to Rise to the Victors, your Sunday night, but Monday morning, I guess, release roundtable here at Maize and Blue Review. I'm Brandon Justice, joined by Josh Henschke and Brock Heilig today. Smaller group, a little bit more, I guess, personable, a little bit more intimate this time around. Usually there's six of us, but just the three of us today, fellas, and we're going to talk about Michigan football, how they performed versus UConn, and then set the table for Big Ten play as Michigan will host Maryland for homecoming on Saturday, which Josh informed me is on ABC. I just kind of thought that was a bucket.
It's on Fox.
What was that?
It's on Fox.
Which game did we discuss being on ABC then? Was that the game against UConn being on ABC that blew my mind?
Yes.
Okay. I knew there was a mind-blowing ABC moment for me. I don't know. I guess
it was UConn. It was last week.
I guess I'm just a college football traditionalist in that like ABC should be saved for the big games. But nowadays ABC is hardly in comparison to Fox and CBS's game days, right? So I don't know. I don't think Michigan and UConn should be on ABC, but that's besides the point. It doesn't matter. So either way, it being on ABC, it being on CBS, it being on whatever, Michigan won, dominated 59-0. Another rendition of what we saw in the first 2 weeks. Similar opponent, similar in that they were hot when they came out and then kind of simmered down a bit, especially with the twos and the threes. Michigan played, 6 quarterbacks. So it was another day in the playground, more or less. Josh, what were your thoughts on the game?
I don't have much, really, to be honest with you. Michigan did what it needed to do. It was good to see, the walk-ons kind of get a taste of collegiate football. They might not get another chance to see the field ever again, or until next season. Hopefully, it'd be nice if they could during the Big Ten play, but it's a cool opportunity for these guys to, who didn't really get to see the field much. It gets to see the field, gets their own unique experience. Leon Franklin will have, a memory that will last for the rest of his life. He'll be able to say that, not only was he a Michigan football player, but he scored, he scored a touchdown. So not a whole lot of walk-ons can hold that distinction. So that was cool. But really, I mean, that kind of tells you the type of game. If that was my major takeaway, is how cool it was for the walk-ons to get experience. That pretty much tells you what, this game was about. UConn's bad. Still don't know what Michigan is. This week's a good week to kind of get the starting, the shape, to kind of mold the clay a little bit to see really what it's going to look like. But I don't really have a whole lot to take away from that game.
Yeah, it was exactly what we thought it was going to be. Sometimes that's a good thing. In this instance, it certainly was. In others, maybe it's not so much. But in the realm of Michigan, UConn going exactly as you'd expect, it's a good thing for Michigan. Brock, anything you saw from this game that stood out to you, anything that surprised you? I guess I know from the narrative of Michigan winning the game and that they won it, so that's a pretty obvious takeaway. But any intricacies maybe you saw or noticed on the field on Saturday that stood out?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to start off by saying thank goodness that the non-conference schedule is over, because you can only sit through so many of those games before you basically fall asleep, right? So Maryland's coming up. It was good to see, like Josh said, all the young guys get in there, walk-ons, guys who probably won't see the field again this season, or if they do, it won't be in such a big role. So no player really stood out to me. Leon Franklin had the touchdown, like Josh said, but it was great to see the walk-ons, and they'll have memories that will last forever. They'll be able to tell their kids and grandkids, hey, I played at Michigan Stadium. I scored a touchdown, right? So it's pretty cool, and it's good job on Harbaugh's part for getting them in there.
Yeah, I don't know how often schools around the country distribute players the way Harbaugh does during non-con. I know that this non-con grants them the opportunity that a lot of schools don't have, and that they don't play one as weak as Michigan did this year. But you got to play your schedule. I know that's kind of what we've been harping on for the past couple of weeks, and not to beat a dead horse there or anything, because I think that there's nothing to talk about there, right? Beyond what we know, which is that you have to play your schedule. So, but outside of that, Harbaugh made the most of it, I think, maximized the potential of it, not in padding stats and keeping McCarthy out there for 4 quarters, and I'm not, you guys know me well enough. Like I don't make anything I cover or write about have to do with like the rivalries or anything. But if you watch how Ohio State went about its business against Toledo, and you watch how Michigan went about its business in its non-conference games, I mean, you see two different strategies. I mean, Ohio State was going for the throat, kept their starters in. Don't correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure Stroud was in when they got to the 4th, right? Or at least when they were like deep into the 3rd. And they had gotten to that mark. So you don't see it too often when coaches are prioritizing getting guys like, Isaiah Gash in there. And you mentioned a few others as well. So if anything, that's one thing to take away. So moving on from that, let's go back to what we talked about last week with buy or sell. We're going to expound upon that a little bit, add some spice to it, get a little bit more specific with it. Basically, what I want to do is talk about a few storylines. We'll start with Andrel Anthony. I think that's one of the more obvious ones to talk about. He's only got 1 target through 3 games, and I'm no expert. I've had some hits, I've had some misses on guys' projections who I think is going to break out, yada yada yada. But Andrel Anthony was on my for sure list. I thought there was no doubt that Andrel was going to pop off this year and rise as a potential number 1 wideout for these guys. Because look, I mean, we're talking about Michigan football in June. It's a lot different than talking about Michigan football in September. But you guys remember those conversations in June where it was, who's going to be Michigan's top wideout, and I think Andrel was probably the most mentioned name because we weren't sure what Ronnie was going to look like off the ACL, and it was hard to tell what that was going to be. There was no absolutes there. So in talking about who the most talented guy in that room was, because let's be honest, like Cornelius Johnson doesn't jump off the page to me. There's nothing he does that's like extraordinary. He's a very good wideout. I think he runs good routes, but his hands were inconsistent last year, and the leaping ability is okay. The hands are okay. It's a lot of like good, not great from Cornelius. Whereas I think like with Andrel, you had a ceiling that was extremely high. So I've been shocked to see him only get 1 target. Not only because we had that thought, it wasn't like a hunch, but look at what we saw last year. Look at the sample size that he put on the page as a true freshman last year. It just seemed like a bucket for him to come back as a sophomore, as much as he and JJ coming in together in the same class, especially. So I'm going to pivot to you guys to tell me why, and then I'll offer my thoughts around towards the end here. But Josh, are you? I guess the buy or sell would be: are you selling the stock on Andrel Anthony right now, or are you buying it really low and still expecting him to, come around in Big Ten play and kind of cement himself? Because look, right now he is not a part of this rotation, in my opinion. I mean, he's out there, but there's no routes designed for him. There's nothing where he's the primary guy. He is begging for looks. I mean, begging. We saw him on the sideline, Josh, from the press box, warming up with the backup quarterbacks in between every single series because he couldn't. I mean, I'm not saying this is why he did it, but he couldn't get any catches on the field. Nobody would throw him on the field. So he tries to get some warm-ups in, tries to get a rhythm in just in case he gets the ball in the 3rd quarter and he hasn't had the ball yet. So I'm Josh, buying or selling on Andrel, and just I guess your thoughts on this situation as a whole.
Yeah, I guess I have to, sell by default. Really, it's no fault of his own. It's not his fault. It's not like he's, he's not practicing well or he's, causing problems behind the scenes or anything like that. They're just simply not getting him the ball. And I thought that was going to change a little bit with JJ McCarthy, as quarterback, because he has a really great connection off the field with Andrel. And, that still could be the case. I mean, we're still talking about a relatively small sample size. This team hasn't played a full 4 quarters together, the first team unit. So a lot of that can change. But, I will say I am very surprised that, guys like, Andrel and Darius Clemens aren't getting more run. Even it took, 3 games to really feature AJ Henning, and they used him in a lot of that Deebo Samuel type of role that, that they've been talking about all off season. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's technically by design of these kind of, slow starts of relying on guys like Ronnie and Cornelius. But we know who those guys are. We know what they're capable of. We don't really know what Andrel's capable of outside of a really good performance against a really bad Michigan State secondary. He hasn't had much run. And again, it's no fault of his own. It's just, when you have two guys like Ronnie and Cornelius, and you have guys like Eric All and Luke Schoonmaker, there's just a lot of mouths to feed, and you kind of expected someone to not be fed. I just didn't think it was going to be Andrel, but there's still plenty of time to get these guys involved. I'm not in, freak out mode yet. It's not like the Michigan offense is been struggling these last 3 games. So we'll see. I mean, maybe things open up, once Maryland comes to town, but yeah, I mean, I had Andrel down as having a huge breakout year. So, it's here we are week 3 and he's, had very little run. I mean, he's had run out there, but he's had very little looks his way. So, that one stumps me a little bit. I mean, again, it's only 3 weeks into the year. So, I can't like jump to some massive conclusions here, but, it is, I mean, again, it is surprising. No matter what way you spin it, it's surprising for sure.
I think what's most surprising is we could sit here and have the conversation about snap percentages and how much look he's not getting. The snaps aren't bad, really. The route run isn't bad either. It's 1 target in 3 games. That's alarming. Mm-hmm. And there's 2 quarterbacks, right? And one of them threw to him a ton last year when he was in and started to get more involved, when Cade was out there. You talk about the Michigan State throw, but there's plenty more too. And then JJ found him as well in a couple of games. So all in all, it's a mind-boggling thing to me because I think I think anyone who knows anything I write knows that Darius Clemens is who I believe is the most talented guy in that room overall from a macro perspective and what he's going to do long-term. I think he's the best pro prospect, but Andrel from a talent perspective, I mean, he's the real deal in that room. And I know it's a crowded room and like you said, a lot of mouths to feed, but just shocking to see 1 target. That's very damning, right? 1 target in 3 games. That's hard to do when you're one of the top 3 guys in an offense that's thrown for over 250 passing yards or over 200 passing yards in back-to-back games. And to not account for any of those yards, that's the other thing is, have any of these targets come from JJ? I don't think they have. I think the only one was the throw in the first game against Colorado State from Cade. So shocking. Brock, we're going to move on to you now. What are your thoughts on this situation? And really just if you want to kind of drift away from just Andrel, but just the makeup of this wide receiver room and what we've learned about it so far through 3 games with so many unknowns coming into the year outside of just knowing there's a lot of good players.
Yeah. Andrel Anthony was something I was thinking about as the game was going on yesterday throughout the evening and into today. And I mean, we saw what he did against Michigan State last year, that 93-yard touchdown. I think he finished with 2 touchdowns and more than 100 yards. So we know his ceiling is high, right? And to see him come out and not really get looked at so far through 3 games has been weird, honestly. Like Brandon, you said, he was expected to be a breakout candidate. Many people had him and along with JJ McCarthy and Donovan Edwards, kind of the 3 sophomore stars of the offense. And JJ McCarthy's been there and Donovan Edwards has been there, but Andrel Anthony's kind of just been not there. He's been on the field, but one play he's blocking, one play he's doing something else. He's a decoy. I mean, yeah, one target, maybe 1 catch, I think, through 3 games. But yeah, it's interesting, and maybe you can attribute some of that to Ronnie Bell being back in the offense this year. We saw it late in the season. Andrel Anthony kind of stepped it up, and maybe now that Ronnie's back, his workload has gone down. Who can really say? But yeah, Ronnie Bell has had his looks. Cornelius Johnson with his game against Hawaii, his 54-yard catch from McCarthy, and then that touchdown. And even Henning, yesterday, Saturday, he was featured in multiple plays. They look like they're trying to get everyone involved, and Anthony just really hasn't been there.
Yeah, and I think you're right about getting everyone involved. I mean, AJ was clearly a focal point of the game plan against UConn. I mean, and that's actually the perfect, Brock, thank you, because I know you didn't plan this, but that's the perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about next. We'll finish this up, but I want to talk about the game planning next and what we've seen from the game planning through 3 games so far, because I think it's really interesting, an interesting point. But before we do that, and just more to the receiver room, I don't mean to like sit here and hate on Cornelius Johnson. It's not like I think he's a bad player. There's more to Andrel, I think there's bigger outcomes there as far as the ceiling goes. Right. So I know Cornelius had the big catch against Hawaii. I know not just the touchdown, but the big 54-yarder. So I think he's good. It's just confusing because we've seen how talented Andrel is. But one thing that you got to get used to about Michigan football lately, I assume, is similar to with the Cade and JJ thing last year. Sometimes the more talented player isn't going to win, and it's going to work out because of the weight. I don't know if that's going to be true with Andrel. We've seen too many young receivers across the country succeed despite their youth. Maybe they don't run the best routes, but they're just so talented and so good that when the ball is in their hands, they're so dangerous. So we'll see how that all shapes out. I think there's plenty of time. I think you guys both pointed that out. There's plenty of time. I mean, we're only going into Big Ten play now, right? So who knows? Maybe nothing on tape with Andrel is good for Andrel, and he kind of has a similar trajectory to last year in that he takes off later in the season. We'll see. I think one big surprise for me, obviously, is just like we didn't see anything from Darius Clemens, Tyler Morris, or Marion Walker as receivers. And we were told that the freshman wideouts were the fountain of youth. And we didn't see anything all 3 non-conference games, which is, no, I don't think it's any indication of how their careers are going to go here by any means. I just think I thought we would see more. I thought they would try and showcase that and get that out there. We really didn't see it. And maybe that's because they wanted to play the older PWOs and the older, graduating guys who were on scholarship, kind of dip down the depth chart, whatever it may be. I'm not sure. Those guys got plenty of time left. They sure didn't hold back Will Johnson or Mason Graham or Derek Moore because they were good enough. So for those receivers to not be at that point it's interesting. It's worth noting and keeping track of as we go on. Okay, let's move on. We'll talk about game planning because this is something that really stuck out to me. Michigan and how they approached each game far different. And I don't know if you guys agree here. I'll ask you the question. In years past, it kind of felt like Michigan just played to their strengths, and that was it. Michigan they had their identity. They were drawing up what they wanted to draw up. And I'm talking like 2018, 2019, 2020, even before that. I would say especially before that, but even more so thereafter as well. Michigan kind of just played to their strengths. They played to their identity. Right. And it wasn't a lot of air yards when they were passing. It was really all relying upon play action. And not that they don't use play action now, but in different ways. Right. There wasn't as much stretching the field. It was a lot of double tight end sets that weren't successful sometimes. Right. In those real dog days, if you guys remember. Whereas now I feel like this offense could change week to week for a good reason. Josh, you and I were talking about in the press box a couple of weeks ago. I mean, think about last year, Michigan's game plan against Washington versus Michigan's game plan against Iowa and how different those two were, but also how successful they both were. Because what Michigan wanted to do against Washington didn't have a whole lot to do with putting up points. It was just putting up enough points and building enough of a lead to play the ball control, keep the ball from Washington and stretch that out. Whereas with Iowa, it was just we're far more athletic than them. They can probably stick with us physically and in the trenches. They knew they could dominate the trench play against Washington. But when they knew they couldn't dominate the trench play, but they knew they could outskill everything that Iowa had, that's what they did, precisely what they did. I mean, look at their biggest runs of that game, biggest plays of that game. The Corum run was a power to the right. The Edwards gadget play to Roman Wilson. A lot of plays were stretching out the field there. So we look at this year so far, and we'll just specifically look at JJ in these 2 games. Think about I think what it boils down to is they're just taking what they're given, whereas in the past they were forcing what they wanted. And what we saw against Hawaii was a stretched out field, a lot of over top stuff from JJ. It started with the Roman Wilson throw. You talk about how he kind of created the play against with Cornelius in the end zone, but also the 54-yarder to Cornelius was stretching the field out. I think he stretched the field out last year. He showed us how he could against Ohio State when he came in and subbed in. So we saw that ability from him. And when we saw that against Hawaii, I thought, okay, this is going to be the offense under JJ. This is what we're going to see. They're going to do a lot of vertical stuff, a lot of vertical zone type of stuff was what I was expecting after watching that game. Baltimore, right? And then yesterday happened, and we saw how many bubble screens? Like 16. Like there was a ton of bubbles and just various other, screen sets. And so they were giving them to them, though. I mean, every single time they got the ball, it was an automatic 12 to 14 yards. So Josh, just from your experience, and I guess to me, this game plan used to be so stubborn. And right now it seems extremely inventive, open, honest. It seems like every week they're really blank slating this and looking at, okay, what is going to counter this team and what are they allowing teams to do to them? So I guess just speak on that and how much of a night and day change you've seen there, or if not much of a change.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is that Jim Harbaugh's adapted. I think one of the major keys is Jim Harbaugh is a very stubborn person, as we've come to learn over the years. And I think he finally got to a point where he kind of realized that, hey, we need to kind of change things up here. We need to, the game is going away from, these pro style, fullbacks and two tight end sets, and going more to this pro spread where you can also have two tight end sets, but you're also spreading out the field as well. So I think a lot of it now is, Michigan is realizing that, they can't force what they want to do every week. It's just not going to happen that way. And you kind of have to take what the defense gives you. And, when in UConn specifically, I mean, you're talking about a team that just parked the safeties deep the whole game to kind of prevent that long game to be had by JJ. It kind of not necessarily took it away, because I still think JJ could have been very successful with the long game. But, when you have a free 12, 14-yard chunk play almost every time you drop back, why not take that and leave the long game stuff, for another week? So there's a lot of elements to it. But really what I have seen though is Michigan is definitely, they're taking what they're being given and, really, really studying tendencies. And, and at the same time, I don't want to say that they're completely not doing what they're going into games, not doing what they want to do. I mean, we know what their identity is and we know what their bread and butter is. They still want to do that, but they have to be more selective about when and where they do this stuff and how they get there. I think that plays a lot into it too, but, I don't think it's like a whole big, philosophy change for Harbaugh. I just think he's kind of adapted his way into a new, fresher way of doing things, and one that's been successful. So, I mean, again, we'll see what kind of what they look like against Maryland. But really, right now, especially against UConn, they took what they could get, and that was just a bunch of chunk plays that really just kind of was just a death by screen, and it was really effective. So, they'll find weaknesses in Maryland's tape, and they'll try to exploit it. It's not a very good Maryland defense. I mean, that's pretty much the running theme for every Maryland team since they've joined the Big Ten. I mean, they've got the offense to put up points, but their defense cannot support their offense. So I'm sure there's going to be plenty to be shown on tape, but they'll eventually end up exploiting.
Speaking of Maryland, Brock, we're going to transition there for your part here, so we don't get a little redundant. I'm sure you agree with the game planning. Maryland's 39th on the S&P Plus here after week 3. If you guys know me, I am an S&P Plus homer, as we all know. Some people don't like that. So Maryland 39th, and the defense has actually been better than expected, but still, like Josh said, that is their weakness without a doubt. I mean, it's 56th on the SP Plus. The offense is 25th, and one of their opponents was Charlotte. Let me look at. I got the schedule right here.
Buffalo.
In Buffalo, right? And Buffalo's in the second year of Coach Linguist, who is, as people know, Michigan's defensive coordinator for 3 days, and so total rebuild there. Charlotte's rough. Charlotte put up 21, and SMU. Josh, we were talking about it yesterday in the press box. Like, that was a game to watch. Selfishly hoping that Maryland won that game so that we could just get like some sort of life, some sort of juice into one of these games that Michigan plays. Yeah. And Maryland did beat SMU by a touchdown, but in doing so, Tanner Mordecai, quarterback for SMU, went 29 of 54 passing attempts, but he had 369 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 picks. And then they had a running back with 86 rushing yards. But, I don't think anyone's going to have 11 catches for 193 yards, but Rashee Rice did for SMU against Maryland. And I get it. It came off of 54 passing attempts. But clearly, Maryland is comfortable giving up yards and keeping things in front of them against offenses that want to open it up. If that's the case, Michigan's going to take what they get from that. And that's going to look a lot like what we saw yesterday, in my opinion, because that's pretty much what UConn did, was they just put everybody over top, completely shut down any of that. And they really locked in on JJ and the keeps, which freed up a ton of space for Blake, who, and I know Blake Corum's 5 touchdowns is a little bit smoke and mirrors over what kind of game he actually had. 2 of those touchdowns were set up to goal lines, but still, he was able to do a lot yesterday because of the fact that JJ causes so much attention from opposing defenses. So if UConn's strategy kind of carries over to Maryland, which if there's any game planning in Michael Oxley's blood defensively, he won't do that, considering that it didn't work. But it seems like that's what they're going to do, because that's what they did against SMU. So, Brock, just your thoughts on how this offense for Michigan matches up with Maryland's defense, from JJ to Cornelius, Blake Corum, and all the way around.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. Maryland's not a good defense, and they haven't been for a while. And we should look to see McCarthy open it up here. And we've already touched on Ronnie Bell, Cornelius Johnson. Roman Wilson will probably have a big game. I thought what you said was interesting about UConn's defensive game plan there, keeping the safeties deep. I think Maryland could look to do the same thing, just to negate the big play factor of McCarthy and the receivers, kind of just keep everything in front of them, making sure, hey, we're fine giving up a few checkdowns as long as it's in front of us and not letting the speedy receivers behind. But yeah, I mean, it'll be good to see at least some level of resistance on defense, and we can finally start to learn something about how good the offensive line. I know we've seen questions, or there have been questions about how good they really are, and how they'll hold up against the Maryland defensive line, and just this offense as a whole, how they'll operate against a team that might actually fight back a little bit.
My mute button wouldn't work there, but yes, it will be nice to finally see some human life inside of Michigan Stadium that does not exist to the home team. And I think we should see something nice from Maryland on Saturday, but at the same time, Michigan might just run through them. SMU outgained them 539 yards, or 520 yards to 439 yards. Tolly only had 214 passing yards against SMU, and his completion percentage was up over 80% last year. And at this stage of the game, I think it's right around 73%, based on when I checked a few minutes ago. So it really hasn't, like, for Maryland, it's been interesting because the defense has looked better than expected. Still not good, but better than expected. But the offense has been less than expected, right? We were expecting a really high potent, high octane offense that never stopped scoring, and a defense that would never stop allowing other teams to score. And what we've seen is like me on both sides, like both of it. Both of it's okay. The defense is fine. The offense is, if it had no expectations, the offense is great. But given the expectations the offense had, it's been disappointing. So So I think the counter for Michigan there has to be, I think Brock made a good point in stretching the field out with JJ if they allow you to, but if they don't, I think Michigan, what we just talked about, kind of like this whole episode kind of marries itself like from one topic to the next especially in game planning and then talking about Maryland, because Michigan showcased yesterday that they're more than willing to say, oh, you don't want us to throw the ball deep? That's fine. We will throw the ball short all day long and have no problem doing it. McCarthy's clearly selfless in that regard. He has no interest in pushing things further that don't need to be. He mentioned how at peace he was yesterday in his press conference, his first as Michigan starter. And yeah, I think they're in a great spot right now offensively. I don't think Michigan's offense has ever been in a spot like this. And that brings us to our last conversation. This episode is kind of breezed given the fact there's only three of us. I laid out a show for more of us, but there's only three of us, so we're going a little bit quicker. So we're going to be under an hour today, but this is our last topic that we're going to talk about. And it's buy or selling. Again, we're going to buy or sell a little bit, because here's the thing. Last week we had a really big defensive talk, and I think we didn't learn anything about the defense this week that we would have learned from last week, or we didn't learn anything last week that we didn't learn this week. You know what I'm saying? So with that in mind, I wanted to talk about offense, because defensively, I think they're good. I just don't know what they're going to be like against the Penn States, the Michigan States, and the Ohio States. They might be stout. They might be super good. They might be bad. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know one way or the other, because based on what we've seen through 3 games, I have no clue. I have no idea, because they haven't faced much of a bloodline on any offensive unit yet. So we're just going to leave that to the side. However, we can gather some things from Michigan's offense, and that's what we're going to do. Josh, buying or selling Michigan's offense being one of the 5 to 10 best offenses in program history with what they have and their personnel right now. And I know that's one of those like, oh, we're being really overzealous here. Why do we have to be so telling with our statements? But I don't know. They're atop the scoring in the country. They came into yesterday tied for first with 2 other teams. I think they held on to that. And if they didn't, they're still right there. First time in Michigan football history, the first 3 games of the season are over 50. I get the context that it's the weakest non-con they've ever had, or one of the weakest non-cons they've ever had, albeit I don't see John O'Corn's offense going out there and scoring 50+. So with where they're at, do you see this Michigan offense? Are you buying this Michigan offense as one of the 5 to 10 best that they're going to end up having in the history of the program dating back from today?
Yeah, I'm buying. I don't think we've seen what this offense is capable of yet. That's the thing, and that's what kind of gives me hope that there's another level to what they've already done, which is, enough so far. I think just from an athletic standpoint, I think this is the most athletic team that Michigan has had in decades. I think JJ McCarthy is the most prolific quarterback Michigan's had in decades. So I think all of that is a recipe for, really putting up some gaudy numbers, or at least the potential to do so. I think if once the offensive line kind of gets itself figured out and, buttons up a few things, I really think Michigan can get its running game going. You need a healthy Donovan Edwards back, of course. But yeah, I don't see why they couldn't be at that level of being, one of the top offenses in school history. When you look at it, most of that, the prolific stuff came from rushing yards. And I think, Michigan is in a position to do both this year. And I don't think they were exactly in a position to do both last year. And they were a pretty decent offense as well. So, yeah, I'm definitely buying. And I'm a believer in the potential of this offense and what it can do. We just have to see it. And I think they're capable of showing that off. And, there's no better time to start than on Saturday.
What do you think about this offense, Brock? What about it? Is it JJ? Is it the combination of the athleticism in the wideouts? Is it the amount of experience and returning production on the offensive line? There's a lot of options. I mean, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, the running back stable, and you say all of that, and we could have brought this up as a topic, Josh, on top of what we talked about Andrel, is the lack of involvement with the tight ends. But, I mean, they're still there too, right? So this offense has so many different facets to it Brock, which one, or I guess what part of this offense, and this is probably an easy question, but what part of this offense do you think gives it that X factor, and why is it JJ? Because I know that's going to be your response.
I mean, honestly, I wasn't going to say JJ.
Well, then go for it. Go for it. Don't let me assume on you. Come on.
I think it's the receivers, honestly. And I mean, obviously, JJ plays a big part in giving them the ball. He's the one who kind of makes them great. But I mean, everywhere you look, even just outside of the receiver room too, it's athletes everywhere. It's guys who can run faster, who are stronger, who are bigger. It's just guys who are just flat out better athletes and better football players than the opponents. And you see all these athletes everywhere, all over the field, mainly in the receiver room. Roman Wilson, probably one of the fastest guys we've heard on the team. I would be willing to bet probably in the Big Ten, he's up there. Roman Wilson, we've talked about. I mean, we've talked about the receivers all show, but even outside of the receiver room, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, athletes everywhere, and even CJ Stokes. He's a guy who I wanted to talk about a little bit. I mean, I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but Blake Corum's finishing his third year this year. This is his third year. Who knows if he's going to be around next year, right? And so CJ Stokes is a guy who we could see kind of step up his role as the season goes on, and maybe even into next year, depending on what Corum does. I know I kind of got off topic there, but the main point here is athletes all over the field, but mainly in the receiver room.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's what we talked about with the Georgias and the Alabamas of the world when everyone started discussing, like, how do you beat Georgia and Alabama? You have to get athletes all over the field. You know, the every down linebackers, the traditional Mike linebackers of yesteryear don't work in today's game at the highest level, right? Like guys like Josh Ross, Josh really played a great game against Ohio State, but against Georgia, that wasn't his ball field. That wasn't his night, right? And we kind of just learn guys like Junior Colson who are more mistake prone, and maybe they aren't as traditional in the linebacker world as guys like Josh Ross are, but the speed that Colson plays with and really the aggressiveness and his ability to close, those types of things, that's what makes you leap. It's the athleticism outside of just one position. I mean, they have athletes on their O-line, I think, So think about Mozzie Smith on the D-line too. I mean, you can't say he's not an athlete, right? And we always say athletic and point to guys like Roman who run like 4.5s, 4.4s, 4.3s, whatever it is. But we also forget about guys like Mozzie who he's doing a multitude of things that we could reference. He's the number one freak in college football, allegedly. So do we need to go on much further, right? So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's a good point. And I think it's something Michigan's made a point of in recruiting these past couple of years. And Michigan recruiting, it gets a hard bargain because it doesn't compare to Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia. It doesn't. But they still think they do a good job in evaluating and in fitting gaps and in fitting roles that they want. Because guys like A.J. Henning and Roman Wilson, talking about Roman Wilson, he's a guy that I know was going to end up getting recruited, but where Michigan was with him and how early they were with him kind of goes to show what they envisioned for him. And I think we're seeing it kind of come to fruition now for him because I think last year there were some designs for Roman over the past couple of years, but I mean, there's some stuff they're drawing out this year and putting out there on tape this year so far through 3 games that's specifically designed for Roman to succeed on that play. Like, he's the only player that's supposed to succeed on that play. It's all designed around him and his speed and what he's able to do. I saw a Twitter user said this. I mean, I could gather it from watching it, but I don't want to leave any credit out there. But the way his patience when the ball's in his hands and his ability to see blocks and his vision and just the patience in general, like you don't see that from wideout too much. Usually wideouts are just balls in hand and I'm darting. And he's a guy that has the ball in his hands, stops and sees it, and then goes where he needs to go and takes advantage of it. So we've seen a lot of good things from this offense, no doubt. Seen a lot of good things from this team, but also a lot of things that might not apply whatsoever in 2 weeks, might not apply whatsoever this week, might not apply whatsoever in 6 weeks, right? So we all can sit here and discuss our takeaways and have our takeaways while still understanding that was the non-conference and that there's still a million things for us to learn about this team, both in analyzing it watching it and even fans at home and cheering for it, there's just so many things still to learn about this team. So I think it's totally okay to have the takeaways we have, with the asterisk and the understanding that Andrel Anthony could have 6 touchdowns by week 7. And we could forget all about when he didn't have all but 1 target in his first 3 weeks. I mean, shoot, we don't know when we're going to see Cade again. And 3 weeks ago, we thought he was playing the best football and he was going to keep playing for the rest of this year, and that it was going to be another year waiting for JJ, or it was going to be a split. So the way that things change and how volatile the sport can be, it's fun, but it can be a bit of a train wreck. So we'll see where all these narratives are, all these non-conference narratives are. We'll revisit them in 3 weeks, see where we're at, and we'll make note and go back and look at them. I think that'll be a fun segment in a couple of weeks, maybe like week 8. We'll do a little look back on some non-conference storylines. Andrel's probably got to be at the top, and the tight ends, I think. So, all right. Well, Michigan plays Maryland on Saturday, as noted on Fox, for their homecoming game, and a little bit of life might actually be entering Ann Arbor outside of the Wolverines on Saturday. We will see. Maryland has not played its best game yet. Will they play their best game on Saturday? Michigan's a team that teams are going to want to play their best game for, and when the personnel isn't as contrasting as it's been the past 3 weeks, crazy things can happen. We've all watched college football these past couple of weeks and seen the crazy things that have occurred, and they're going to continue to. That's the beauty of it all. So you just got to hope you're not on the wrong end of it. All right, this has been Rise to the Victors. That's your recap on this week in Michigan football. We'll talk to you next week. In between there, plenty of podcasts coming out. We've got you covered all over the place on Rivals. Michigan.rivals.com. That's where the Maize and Blue review is. Go sign up today. $9.99 a month. Join our exclusive community. The Den is the place to be, whether it's Saturday or any day in between Saturday and the next one. During football season, we've got you covered with intel, analysis, college basketball recruiting, college football recruiting, the whole shebang. For the Maize and Blue review, for Josh, for Brock, I am Brandon. This has been Rise to the Victors. We will talk to you guys later this week on one of our other shows. Have a good one.